everyone, and welcome to the third installment of the leadership candidates for the latest Tory leadership race. So 44 days ago or so, we had the race between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss, and now we have essentially, again, a two-horse race between Penny Mordaunt and Rishi Sunak. So I've already done the profile on Rishi. I'm not going to sort of repeat myself. You can check out my additional comments on the Astro Insights blog. So I'm just going to do Penny Mordaunt because I do think it's right to be kind of fair and to look at both candidates so that people can, make up their own minds. So let's dive in and have a look at Penny Mordaunt. Obviously, she's the least known of the candidates, and people will only really have become possibly aware of her, recently. Even though she has been around essentially since the Cameron government. But, she's a female candidate, and that's always really important when we're talking about sort of representation. So let's have a look and see what we can see. So a little bit of background, first of all. So Penny was born in Devon, but she grew up in Portsmouth, which is, of course, a major naval centre for the UK. And she comes from a family that's got a sort of a military background. So her father was a paratrooper who then became a teacher, and her mother was a special needs teacher who unfortunately died of cancer when Penny was aged just 15. And this proved to be a really kind of pivotal event in her life, where she had to sort of look after her brothers. She's a twin, so she's got a twin brother, and then she's got I think a younger brother, and so she was kind of the main female caregiver in the house until her father remarried, and she was also the first in her family to go to university. So, and she's quite big on the fact that she funded this through jobs like factories and so on. And I suppose of the candidates that we've had so far, she's probably the most of the people, if you like she's had a much more a kind of a I suppose a lower middle class background. She was the first in her family to go to university as well, so that's kind of interesting, because very often that social capital does really kind of transfer when it comes to moving into sort of elite circles later on. So she's the first in her family to go to university, and prior to entering politics, she had a long history of working in the charitable and the volunteer sector. So I think after school, she went and volunteered for in Romania, and she sort of worked with a charity that was helping with all those those very sort of like not illegal, but those orphanages that we all kind of heard about, which was so kind of awful. And she's done other things. She's worked for the World Bank, and she's also done a lot within her local community as far as helping people, like with things like shopping during the COVID and so on. So a very strong history of volunteering and as I say, of working in the sort of the third sector, if you like. So that's kind of her background. And then she stood for Parliament in 2005, but she didn't win. Her first, I think the first time she was successful was 2010. So this was part of the Cameron-led government. And she became the MP for Portsmouth North. She lost the seat again, I think, after the coalition, because the coalition was to a degree quite unpopular, but she managed to regain it in 2015, and she's kind of held onto it ever since. So currently, her most recent role is Lord President of the Council and Leader of the House of Commons, and of course, in these roles she became quite prominent because she led the accession ceremony for King Charles. And so previous government posts have included Paymaster General, Secretary of State for Defence, apparently the first woman to hold the post, Secretary of State for International Development, Minister for Disabled People, Health and Work, Minister for the Armed Forces, and Minister of Local Government. So again, the strong kind of background of this affiliation with kind of military, and then also international development and sort of working with charitable or kind of disabled causes and that kind of thing. She hasn't been terribly controversial. The only thing where she's really kind of run into trouble is around her views about trans people. A lot of people felt that she came out strongly in support of the LGBTQ community, and then that she sort of backpedaled when she talked about being a biological woman. There's sort of a clip of her talking about being a woman who doesn't have a willy, and she was kind of it was sort of a retort or a remark in contrast to something that Margaret Thatcher said, which was that if you want to be successful in politics, you need a willy. But obviously Margaret Thatcher was living in a different time, and she was talking more about feminism. But she, Penny Mordaunt kind of uses as a way to sort of address the issue of, the fact that she is a biological woman. And as I say, some quarters of the LGBTQ community felt that she betrayed them. Others would argue that she was simply stating the biological facts. I'm not going to really comment on that, but it's just, that is kind of an area where she's kind of received criticism, and some people also feel that she tends to backpedal. So she will say something and then sort of backpedal on it. So some people feel that she's a bit of a flip-flopper. But anyway, let's look at her chart and see what it can tell us, and kind of go from there. So in terms of like an overall kind of moniker for her, people are seeing her as potentially the party unifier and more of the kind of the grassroots candidate, in the sense that she's had her childhood and her background is more in keeping with ordinary kind of working folk, more like the electorate than sort of someone privileged who went to like Oxbridge and that kind of thing. So that's how she's kind of positioning herself. As far as her chart is concerned, I mean, it's an interesting one. First of all, I have rectified it, so we don't know her date, her time of birth. We only know that she was born on the 4th of March, which makes her sun Pisces. But, I've kind of thought about her chart quite a lot, and there's something about her that reminds me a bit of Adele. And Adele's got quite strong Jupiter in her chart. So that, together with the fact that her mom died at a young age, which to me possibly signifies Chiron the 4th, makes me think that she has Jupiter rising. And she is quite a big personality, and she's also very kind of no nonsense, and sometimes a little bit, people will say she was frank, which can be a quality of sort of Jupiter or Sagittarius, actually, that they can known for sometimes having a little bit of foot in mouth sort of disease, but they're also very straightforward people, and quite no nonsense. And to me, having Saturn on the descendant would then make sense, because she is quite a serious person in a lot of respects. So, that's certainly how she kind of comes across. You don't often see her smiling. It's kind of interesting. So I think that fits quite well with that sort of Jupiter Saturn kind of balance, if you like. That combination seems to fit quite well. And so that's what I've kind of gone with. Obviously, as I say, we once we know her time of birth, we can sort of rectify. But I'm thinking, Sagittarius rising. And this also gives her Mars in the first house. Now, Mars is dignified. It's exalted in the sign of Capricorn, so very strong, and it's with the North Node. And again, I think you do get the sense from her. She's not a very obviously Venusian person, even though she does actually have Venus in Pisces, which is also where Venus is exalted, but it's not immediately apparent. As I say, she does come across as sort of like a more of like an Artemis sort of character. If you want to talk about kind of lunar energy or sort of feminine energy, she's more of somebody who is she grew up with brothers, and as I say, she did spend time in the armed forces, and to me, she does give off that sense of somebody who's kind of energetic, can do, who's quite focused, no nonsense, and is not really somebody who, unlike Liz Truss, who is going to sort of seduce using feminine wiles, that kind of thing. She comes across as more of that sort of warrior kind of archetype, if you like. Although there is definitely, as I say, with her Pisces stuff, there is this more sensitive side to her. So if we look, we can see that she's actually got a stellium in Pisces. She's got the Sun, Venus, the Moon, and Mercury. So quite a lot in Pisces. But as I say, it's not immediately apparent. And I think it's interesting that these planets fall below the horizon if, as I say, that the house positions are correct. So in other words, you wouldn't see this. This is the more kind of private half of the chart. It's the nocturnal half of the chart. So this is kind of what the more public-facing stuff that you see. And of course, here we've got all the major sort of the outer or transpersonal planets. We've got Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto. So this is more what you're likely to see from her at first glance. And then, the other stuff is kind of below the horizon. But as I say, I do think that you do get the sense from her that she is quite no-nonsense, quite driven, quite practical. And I think that Mars in Capricorn really exemplifies that. So this interesting combination, again, of kind of Jupiter-Saturn energy with the Sagittarius Capricorn combination in her first house. So I think that for me that fits quite well. But then, as I say, she does have this Moon-Venus combination in Pisces. You can see it's a conjunction. And this can bestow empathy, calmness, and a love of art and beauty. And for me, the first time when I saw this in evidence was when she gave that TEDx talk a couple of years ago. I think it was 2014 or 2015, about not soft power, I think she called it smart power. And she talked a lot about this greenhouse in the desert and kind of bonding with people, and then also going to Romania and talking to some guy, and he was sort of very big about like science and medicine and facts, and her point was that this was to sort of miss the point of what these orphans needed, which was kind of love and play and empathy. So her softer side sort of like coming out. But I think, possibly this is part and parcel of her background. As I say, she did lose her mother quite young, and she did have to sort of grow up quite quickly, being the only kind of female in the house until her father remarried. And this, I think, is possibly, this wound in this Chiron in the fourth house, which incidentally makes sort of like a T-square, a T-square to the nodes. So I think that fits quite well, actually, that's sort of really what sort of drives her, or what is sort of behind her development as a sort of a soul, is really this wound that she's had to sort of overcome quite early on, of kind of losing her mother. And I suppose also then with Mars on her north node, and then the south node being in Cancer, which is obviously the sign of the mothers, and it's in the seventh house. So having lost, or having to let go of the sort of mother archetype quite early on, and then having to embody the more sort of resilient, keep calm and carry on, stay strong energy of Capricorn, which is her north node, and having to learn that through the men in her life, through her father, through her brothers, and being surrounded by a lot of male energy. I think it really fits quite nicely with that T-square. So I think, again, for me, that's sort of reinforcing the chart. But as I say, she does have Saturn on the descendant, and this can make people quite serious. And it's interesting that the Saturn is in an air sign, so it's in the sign of Gemini. And this is very often, somebody who is quite sensible and a thought leader. And I think this is something that we're going to come back to when we look at her human design, that actually she comes up with some interesting ideas, and these are often born, I think, from this sort of contemplation that's come from suffering. If you look at that sextile between Saturn and Chiron, that she's really kind of been forced to sort of dig deep and to think quite deeply about certain things, particularly when it comes to relationships. So her relationships being great teachers, particularly family relationships, close family relationships, being sort of great teachers to her, and sort of helping her to sort of grow and mature. Yes, so as I say, the chart ruler then would be Jupiter in Aquarius, which for me again fits. There is something quite, I don't know what the word is that I want to kind of use, but there is something about her that is exceptional, or sort of that makes her stand out, but at the same time is quite untouchable. And I think Jupiter in Aquarius fits quite well. So somebody who has strong beliefs around humanitarian ideals, which I think we've seen with her volunteering and that kind of thing. But at the same time, somebody who is also in a way self-contained, and who is impersonal in a way. It's kind of interesting with that Jupiter. But Jupiter, is interestingly in a trine to Pluto, so totally different to Liz Truss, who's got that Jupiter-Pluto opposition, or rather the Jupiter-Uranus opposition. That this this kind of idealism, this altruism, is expressed best through things like teaching, through foreign travels, and as I say, she has sort of volunteered overseas, through kind of lawmaking and social justice, and I think that's probably the main reason why she's gone into politics. From what I can see from her kind of her career history, her track record. So wanting to change things for the better, but for the group, because of course the ninth house is really about the group or the culture or society in which she lives. And of course Libra being the sign of kind of justice, of equality, of peace, and of balance, but also being the lawmaker or the lawgiver. So I think, this kind of Jupiter Pluto trine really talks about having gone into politics for kind of the social justice reasons, sort of idealism, wanting to change things for the better. Then, as I say, Mars and Capricorn in the first would make her brusque, frank, and sort of have no pretensions. And I do think you get that strong sense from her. The way she describes herself is sometimes quite funny and quite sort of like self-deprecating. Not somebody with a big ego. And I think with the North Node, helping her to sort of learn to be independent and to be assertive, and in many ways to kind of to learn to stand on her own two feet, which I think her early experience, with having lost her mother, was kind of the first example of. So that's really kind of part of what her soul's evolution is here to sort of like to learn. But she does have a lot of mutable water in her chart. If you look at the elements, water is the strongest, and the mutable planets are the strongest, or mutable signs. So planets and mutable signs. So this stellium, I think, really coming to the fore, and possibly something that, so very often what they kind of say is that the first thing you see about somebody is their rising sign, their ascendant. So this is kind of almost the masks that they wear, their persona, and then it's only later on that you get to know the sun. And that, as I say, is in this very soft Pisces, sign of Pisces. So that's quite interesting. But also what's interesting is that, the sun is in the third house. So again, this is the house of siblings, of kind of brothers and sisters, of local community, of communication and teaching, learning and teaching. And is ruled by Neptune in Sagittarius. So again, combining those two energies, Jupiter used to be the ruler of Pisces before Neptune was discovered. So again, this interesting combination of kind of enthusiastic idealism that is hidden in the 12th house. So again, this can be associated with institutions like charities. So working behind the scenes, and as I say, if it is the rule of her third house, to me it makes sense, where she's a kind of like she has soft power, or a quiet influencer in a way. And I think maybe in a way is really good at sort of reminding people what's important. And I think she's actually done this already in this particular leadership race, by saying no to Boris Johnson, doing the right thing, not kind of caving for kind of like doing deals and that kind of thing, like standing because she believes that that's the right thing to do, and not necessarily, even though she only had 24 supporters or backers, not sort of giving into that sort of, so having integrity. So that's kind of interesting. And as I say, she does have potentially Uranus and Pluto in her 9th and her 10th houses, so quite prominent. And that, as I say, would indeed be somebody who wants to be a reformer, who wants to make changes in society through what she does for a living, or through her kind of public profile, but very much coming from a position of like principles and beliefs and sort of ideals. So coming from quite a conviction sort of position, not a career politician. So that's interesting. So this is Penny Mordaunt's a chart combined with the Tory party, as I've done with the other people. So again, a very different emphasis in this particular chart, unlike the last two contenders that we looked at that had strong like links to the midheaven of the Tory party chart and to the planets that are around the midheaven. Her emphasis is more strongly in other areas that are sort of like emphasizing different things. I mean, she does have Saturn on the Tory Pluto, and it is opposed to the Tory Neptune, which is conjunct her Neptune. So that's kind of interesting that she's got same Neptune as the Tory Neptune, which is, as I say, it's idealistic, it's enthusiastic, and it is ultimately service oriented. So that's interesting. But her Saturn in that Gemini, which she has on the descendant, possibly, I think could kind of squelch like some of the message of the Tory party, that she might sort of seem a little bit too severe or stern in a way for some people in the Tory party, and they might feel that isn't really how they want to sort of sell themselves, and that in a way she's too serious, so that she might in a way like quelch enthusiasm, or in some way not necessarily espouse traditional Tory party ideas, if you like, that she may not always necessarily seem on message. So that's potentially problematic. But then on the positive side, she's got this, that Pisces stellium in the 7th and the 8th houses of the Tory chart. So in a way, representing the other. So first of all, she is a female candidate, and that makes her kind of other to the Tory party, which is very much kind of, male oriented and sort of patriarchal. So she's bringing a kind of a softer element, a softer touch to the Tory party. And in this sense, her Mercury being close to the Tory Mars, in a way, is kind of reminding them of like the importance of soft power, which is, let's say, something she discussed at that TED talk, that that soft power is just as important as sort of like overt political power. And also with that Neptune reminding the Tories about the fact that they're there to serve the electorate. Fourth house is generally speaking to do with domestic affairs and with the electorate. So just kind of like a reminder of the fact that political parties and sort of MPs are actually there to serve the people who've elected them, and in that sense maybe is sort of like a not very comfortable reminder to those MPs who do tend to sort of jostle for position, or as a recent critic of the party kind of said, tick the boxes not because it's in the interest of the country, but more because it's in their own self-interest. So in that sense, I think maybe she is a kind of like a stern reminder that maybe some MPs won't really care to sort of like to be made aware of that it's a little bit embarrassing. But it's interesting, as I say, that this Moon Venus conjunction it forms a T-square to the Tory party Mercury Neptune opposition. So as I say, with Saturn here, and then these squares here, these red lines that you can see here. So as I say, I think this focal point, she's kind of bringing them back to the need for the more compassionate kind of conservatism that we saw with David Cameron and with his government, and sort of taking people away from, as I say, the more kind of jostling for position and the sort of PR and the kind of the more kind of shallow and glib side of politics, all about sort of briefing the media and saying the right thing and that kind of stuff. So as I say, a kind of a soft or gentle reminder. And then she's got a loose grand trine with her Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. So you can see Pluto here is also conjunct the Tory party Pluto. So that's quite powerful. So reminding them of what's important. And I think she actually said it in an interview with the BBC the other day. She said, the focus should be on the people, not on the politicians. And that's really what's important. So kind of bringing them back to first principles and making them remember they're sort of the basis for forming the party in the first place, which is, interestingly, Pluto ruled this IC in Scorpio. That in terms of values, that they are there to serve the people and there to sort of like to hold power and to govern responsibly and in a fair way, which is very British, this idea of fairness, for the people, and to communicate this. To sort of bear this in mind, this is third house, so that work can be done. And here's Jupiter, that Jupiter in Aquarius, that altruistic Jupiter in Aquarius in the Tory party sixth house. So this is the house of health. It's the house of of getting things done, of the everyday business of being an MP, which is about working in your constituency to sort of change things. It's about, campaigning in Parliament on behalf of your constituents and on behalf of the country. So doing that sort of everyday kind of graft, if you like. That's where her Jupiter sort of sits. And then I think, what's interesting too is that she's this Jupiter of hers is trying to the Tory party Pluto, but square to Uranus. So the Tory party Uranus is kind of sitting down here, coming up to the IC, and her Uranus is not far off. So it's interesting that she's got a lot of outer planets that are in quite strong synastry with the Tory party. So in a lot of respects, kind of here to remind them of actually their sort of core values and what they're here to do in terms of ideals. But as I say, interesting that there's a square you can see here between her Jupiter and the Tory party Uranus, and Uranus rules the 7th house. So in a sense, through her kind of everyday kind of graft, maybe showing some MPs up, but also I think this pointing to the fact that the Tory party is seen as the party of the establishment, and if they want to sort of like continue to be relevant, 7th house is kind of significant others. If they want to continue to be relevant, they need to appeal to females, to female voters, but also to other groups, to be seen as progressive in a lot of ways. So, also representing the LGBTQ community, there needs to be a space in the party for those voters too. Otherwise, they're always going to be seen as the party of kind of patriarchs and the old way of doing things, rather than the party of progress. So, there's an interesting sort of clash there, I think, that she represents, she kind of epitomizes, in a lot of respects, having made those quite high profile comments about trans people and so on, that she in a way highlights that tension in the party that they have yet to sort of resolve. And then, as I say, her Saturn forming part of that Neptune-Mercury opposition, which is quite difficult to reconcile. Luckily it is in mutable signs, the Sagittarius kind of Gemini polarity, and that is potentially where her ascendant-descendant axis sits. So in that sense, maybe she's here to heal the splits in the party, and so in a sense is maybe the candidate of unity. But but then she's also got Mars in the 5th house. So here's her Mars in Capricorn, and this is opposite the Tory Saturn. So that's quite tricky. Again, she doesn't fit in with kind of Tory matriarchs either. She's not Theresa May. She's not Margaret Thatcher. She is a different kind of kettle of fish. And so in that sense, that can be tricky to sort of, I think, to be accepted, to find a place in the Tory party. I don't think she really fits. In a way, she's kind of an outsider. In a lot of respects. And I think it's interesting that her Chiron sits on the Tory party Jupiter, that in a sense she is kind of an outsider, but in being an outsider, not necessarily finding a particular faction within the party that she feels comfortable or belongs with, that she in a way is reminding the Tory party of certain core like beliefs or of the fact that they need to also represent the younger generation, Jupiter here ruling the 5th house of children and of legacy, so that she represents almost the future maybe of where the party needs to sort of move, but isn't maybe quite ready yet, and so may end up being rejected by the party faithful, the core, because she's seen as like in a way ahead of her time as a politician. So it's kind of interesting, as I say, that in a way she's a kind of a catalyst for change and reform within the party, but may pay the price herself in terms of her own career, that she may be the scapegoat, if you like. So let's move on to our human design, because this is where things I think get really, really interesting. So unlike the last two candidates, we had Jeremy Hunt, who's a manifester. We had Liz Truss, who was a manifesting generator. We had Rishi Sunak, who's a generator, and now we've got Penny Mordaunt, who's actually a projector. So this is a different kind of sort of type within human design. So projectors, interestingly, they are considered to be sort of wise organizers or guides with good, with sort of good ability to sort of judge, but they aren't always major players because they don't have their center of authority attached to a motor center, so they don't have energy themselves. They need a group surrounding them to actually give them the energy or the motivation or the momentum to actually, be able to do things. So they tend to be advisors. So it's interesting that she is a projector with splenic authority, very unusual, which is similar to, the same as Nelson Mandela, actually. So a wise organizer or guide with good survival instincts, and this is where the spleen center comes in, who's a natural protector, but whose abilities and skills need to be recognized before they can shine. So the key thing with the motivators is they have to wait for the invitation, and very often in that process they can sort of jump the gun. They can sort of try to initiate and have it kind of not work out, and that can be difficult to deal with. They can feel like failures. But the key thing with projectors, as I say, is that they need to wait for the invitation. So they need to wait for people to seek them out, to recognize their skills and talents and abilities, their wisdom, and then seek it out. And that's how they get invited into the group. So projectors, as I say, don't have the same levels of sustained energy and drive as other types because they're not connected to a motor center. So they need lots of rest and downtime. And, in this sense, think about Obama. He's also a projector. And so they're good leaders, but not in the traditional sense of being go-getters who lead from the front. They're better as a wise observer whose advice can be called upon in sort of certain situations. So they're very good at penetrating to the sort of the heart or the nub of a problem and then offering a pithy solution. But because they have fewer centers activated, you can see she's only got 2 centers activated, they do have a tendency to be easily conditioned or influenced by their environment and other people. So in that sense, they do need to keep themselves a little bit separate from other people or from the group in order to maintain their integrity, and therefore can't always be in the thick of things, isn't necessarily, as I say, that leader, that high profile leader who leads from the front. They have more soft power. So I think it's interesting that she talks about that quite a lot. But the other thing is that because she has so many centers that are open, she's quite empathic, and she's very good at bringing out the best in others. So she's very other focused. And as I say, we do see that with her stellium on the descendant of that Tory party chart, and also with all her Pisces placements, makes her very empathic and very service oriented. So there's a potential to be self-sacrificing, and she's got to watch that, I think, with that she's got to kind of keep that balance. Now in terms of her kind of her incarnation cross, so this is the equivalent of the angle, so this is the combination of the sun and the earth, sort of both at birth and then also 88 days before. So this gives her the right angle path of consciousness. And the energy of the cross is here to ask questions and examine patterns to find deeper understanding. So it's very much focused more on sort of wisdom and on asking questions. So being more of a philosopher rather than a sort of traditional leader in the kind of secular sense. So asking questions like, is everything okay with this? Is it working well? So someone who's driven to ask questions from a logical perspective of kind of like, why are we at a particular place with a certain issue or situation? And then trying to find the answers to help others sort through and logically kind of identify the problems, like the missing pieces of the puzzle, and then to find those answers and then to kind of move forward. So a very different kind of a leader, as I say, maybe somebody who's better in an advisory role rather than kind of leading from the front. And that's because she's got the sun here in the gate 63, so it's in the crown center. But you notice that it's not connected in any way through a channel. So it's independent. It's not, it's sitting on the outside, if you like. It needs something else, like a fourth, someone who's got like the fourth gate activated, which is kind of like the innocent, the fool, someone who's going to ask her, well, what do you think we should do in this situation? To sort of then activate that wisdom. So what's also interesting about Penny, though, is that she is a very good communicator, and in a way is here to sort of help with conceptualizing and with sort of leading in terms of being an ideas influencer. So 3-5 profiles are people who need to learn from experience. So that's the third line. So they start out in life making a lot of mistakes, trying different things, and I think we can see that from her. The fact that she experimented quite a lot. She was a volunteer, then she went to university, then she sort of worked in the third sector, then she sort of went into politics, and then briefly, was not elected again. So she had 5 years in which she became an entrepreneur and worked in a local community. So she had a lot of time to sort of make mistakes and to learn from those experiences, because 3s can't learn from others. They have to learn through doing. But then the 5 part of her profile means that she's a very good communicator who's good at conceptualizing. But the problem with 3-5s is that they can fall into the trap of this seductive chasing after the potential of ideals or hypotheticals. So they can be quite idealistic. And I think we see that with her, her Jupiter in Aquarius, but also the Pisces stuff can also lean a little bit to idealism, kind of wanting things to be not perfect, but ideal. And so they need occasional reality checks in order to stay grounded. But I think what's interesting about her is that she does have the root center activated, so she is quite grounded. And I think we see that with with her Mars in Capricorn, that she is quite a down-to-earth, matter-of-fact kind of person. So that's really interesting. But where her sun and her gates are, I think, is quite telling. So as I say, she's got the sun in gate 63 over here, line 3, and this has to do with the personal life theme of questioning why. So asking, what are we doing, and discover the meaning of things. So very good at helping others see what they're missing, finding the answers, seeing connections, being a witness to and a catalyst for growth. So as I say, a kind of a guide or a teacher, but not someone who's necessarily doing the kind of the heavy lifting or the sort of the actual decision making. So someone who offers suggestions which then need to be recognized and taken up. And her moon is in gate 37.2, and this is in the emotional center. So this is all about the gate of family and community, and I think it's so interesting that she lost her mother quite early, with the moon being very maternal, that she's got this this moon here, and it's all about establishing a sense of belonging based on community, and it might be driven by the unconscious gate associated with her moon, which is all about the need to create joy and a sense of groundedness. And this comes through sort of being rooted in a particular family group or community. So the sort of the very basic needs around survival, and I think it's interesting that she became a caregiver and somebody who catered to the needs of her family on that level very early on in her life. Became the sort of the kind of mother in what is the word? Not the token mother, but the someone had to step into the role of mother, the archetype of mother, quite early on, and this is where her South Node is. So she's learned this role from other lifetimes, and so is almost bringing in kind of experience from the past. So she doesn't necessarily have to have children or be a mother herself in order to be maternal, that she can sort of draw on these other life experiences from that South Node, and sort of step into that role quite easy and quite quickly. So I think that's really, really interesting. But what you see about her chart is that she doesn't have the throat center or the will center activated. And of course, these are the two centers of leadership in the traditional sense. So she's not set up to work as a traditional leader. She's more of a thought leader and an influencer. And I think we're starting to see that, kind of now as she sort of comes into maybe she hits her stride, actually. And I thought I saw it very strongly in that TED talk, that there were really there were strong elements within it that were very, you could see hit a note with people. And I think maybe this is what she needs to sort of move towards in the future. So I think interestingly that she's got the spleen and the root centers activated. And as I say, these are strongly about survival and about getting basic needs met. And, the spleen is interesting to have as a center of authority because it's the center associated with animal instinct. So it's kind of split-second decision-making. It's often driven by fear or the need to protect in one's environment. And it's the same center that Jeremy Hunt has, kind of activated. But it works in a different way because it's linked to via the only two channels that she has to that root center. So set up in a way for that kind of military type of background where you are there to sort of defend and protect, your country. So act as a kind of like a warrior almost in a sense, and that instinctive ability to sort of sense danger and to warn people of potential dangers that sort of lie ahead. So that's, I also think, quite interesting, almost like an early alarm bell, if you like, of what's potentially wrong. But then, she just recently had her Chiron return in sort of May of 2022. And of course, this then changes her chart quite substantially. So it's interesting now that, if in terms of her Chiron return chart, she's got a lot more centers now activated. But what's fascinating is that the two centers associated with leadership are linked via channels that are very much emotional. So similar to Jeremy Hunt. So leading in terms of being like being a sort of a conduit for emotional, connecting people back to their emotions, being a conduit for kind of love, unconditional love, and the ability to express emotion, to help others almost become a catalyst to express their emotions, being a vessel or conduit of kind of love, but on a sort of more of a kind of transpersonal level. So we're talking here more about compassion, if you like, than necessarily leading in terms of like ideas, because you can see that 63 is still not connected. So the crown center still not connected to the Ajna center, even though the Ajna center is now connected to the throat. So that's really, really interesting. And yet she's got the 2034 activated now, which is a lot to do with what they call the alchemist. So somebody who's very good at manifesting material abundance. But I think what we'll see in her chart is that with her Venus, she's got Venus in gate 55 here, which is all about abundance, but it's emotional abundance. And it's really interesting that the shift is quite subtle, but it's actually to do with intangible kind of qualities and abilities and sort of assets. So those kind of like soft skills that she talked about in that TEDx talk, that she can now embody those. So her progressed sun is now in gate 8.4, which is called holding together, and it's in the line of respect. So it's the gate of fellowship. It's about groups, and it's about contributing to the collective through leading by example, but also about conveying concepts of potential interest to the masses. So remember what I was saying about her being a potential thought leader. So she's a torchbearer who can make a contribution to humanity through inspiring others. So this is really where she stands to sort of come into her projector energy, is inspiring others through her efforts to expand trust, prosperity, and so what I was saying about abundance, through win-win cooperation with others. So when she helps others win, she wins too. And I thought I'd read you a little bit from the I Ching about this particular Lao gate, because it's quite interesting. It talks about the need to change groups. So it says grouping describes your situation in terms of the people and things with which your spirit connects you. The way to deal with it is to look at who you group yourself with and how you use ideas to categorize things. So those two things I was talking about. The way you put things and people together is changing. Stop and take a look around. Try to perceive essential qualities in order to get to the heart of the matter, which is what projectors are so good at. Compare things and sort them out. So again, helping others to compare and to sort. So cutting through confusion. Find what you belong with. You can ask your question in many different ways, but the key thing is to change who you group yourself with. So to me, this kind of points to maybe an exit from politics, if I'm honest. That maybe she is not really suited as a personality for that kind of cut and thrust of politics, that she's possibly better sort of like, she's better suited to working in the third sector, which is where she kind of started off. And that this really may be where she can shine, ultimately. So just kind of going back to her moon. So her moon has now progressed to gate 38.1, which is the gate of the fighter. So the fighter is someone who stands against or opposes lies and untruth. And I think it's interesting that, as I say, that she said no to Boris Johnson, who we discovered didn't have 100 backers, who was trying to con both Penny and Rishi to join him, to sort of give up their leadership sort of positions and to sort of join with him. So in other words, he was looking for their backers, and she said no to him, which I think is, in that sense, is really epitomizing this moon. But what's so interesting is that it's in line 1, and this is about being impartial and believing that all will be well. So I think it fits really nicely with that energy of Junior of Norwich, which is, all will be well, all is well, and that there's no need to struggle or fight. That there's this move from kind of stubbornly struggling to sort of maintain a particular position to perseverance and then to honor. So it's kind of taking the line of least resistance almost. And I think, if I'm honest, I don't think she's going to win this leadership race. But I think that that's ultimately going to be to her benefit, that if she goes with the flow, like with all her Pisces stuff, that mutable water, that she will find herself in the place where she actually belongs. And I think that where she actually belongs is in her local community, doing work there. So I think it's interesting that as I say, that all her centers are kind of switched on, but the 2 leadership centers, as I say, are activated by the channels of unconditional love and the ability to express emotion. So I think that where she will really come into her own is a career as an advisor or in the 3rd sector, and that especially if she does this from her home community, because this will give her that sense of belonging that I think that is driving her, with that unconscious moon in her original chart. Because she didn't have a mother, finding a place where she feels that she belongs. And I don't think she belongs in the Tory party, to be honest. As we saw with that Chiron and that sort of thing, that in a sense she's an outsider and that she will remain an outsider. So I think her natal Chiron and that T-square to the nodes shows that her life's work is perhaps in helping others with grief, things like grief counseling or helping families. The nodes are in the Cancer Capricorn axis, which is all about kind of parents and families. And of course, here she can lead by example. She knows what it's like to lose a family member early on and to struggle, as a family financially, and having to sort of like go and do, kind of hand to mouth type of jobs like working in a factory and so on in order to get by. And this is what families need to. They need people who can kind of empathize with them during the cost of living crisis. And I think she can do that very effectively in her own community through sort of, like, as I say, initiatives designed to help people through the crisis, led by the sort of the 3rd sector. So, as I say, overall, my feeling is that, she definitely is unlikely to sort of, to win in this particular race. And even though she might take a role in government, in this particular government, there's another sort of 2 years or so to run until the next election. I think maybe after that, she might consider resigning her position and moving into the 3rd sector. That's my kind of gut instinct for her, is where she would really, really shine. And that maybe the next 2 years will pave the way for that she will, her skills will be recognized and her community will invite her to sort of take that role on more like full time, So that's kind of it for me. Hope you've enjoyed this. As I say, if you are interested in some of my other political astrology articles, you can go to the Astro Insights blog and check them out. Yes, but interesting, very, very interesting times. The next few days I think are going to be very eventful. So let's see what happens. And yeah, watch the space.